Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from beautiful Florida. And today we have another question from Mary. And as with our last question from Mary, this one actually comes from a group that Mary belongs to, where someone has asked this question, either of the group or directly of Mary, I'm not sure which. And she would like my take on it, either to compare with her own answer or to help to formulate her answer. I also am not entirely sure about that. But the question has to do with the efficacy of having a sigil tattooed upon oneself. And Mary goes on to say that she's not certain that the person asking this question has any idea what a sigil actually is or how it is used, and could I speak to this as well? And indeed I can. The term sigil comes from the Latin sigillum, which means a seal. And that's basically exactly what a sigil is. A seal, for those who do not recall, is a visual depiction that represents a person or an institution or organization. The use of seals is very ancient, and it has been particularly important in history when people were not particularly literate. It gave a way to recognize who a person was in terms of their effective signature or their ownership of certain goods, when writing was not necessarily an option. So it's basically a picture that represents something else. And in magic, it's used as a key to that person or organization that it represents. And you use the sigil to help to focus your interaction with what it represents. And it can represent a number of things. Very commonly, sigils represent a deity or spirit, and particularly in ceremonial magic, this is the case. A sigil can also represent a person or an organization. And in the Correllian tradition, we use a lot of these. Every temple, for example, has its own sigil. And we are certainly not the only ones who do this, but I think we make more use of it than any other tradition that I know of. And a sigil can also represent a particular act of magic. And this is especially true in chaos magic, but also in the Correllian tradition we do quite a bit of this as well. Very often when we do a global working of some sort or another, we will create a sigil to help people to focus on that working and to tie their energy in with everyone else's energy. And an example of this is our Correllian Peace campaign, where we have a Correllian Peace sigil to help to coordinate and focus the energy that people are putting into the peace campaign. And to remind you, the peace campaign is to gather forces of love and peace to combat forces of fear and hatred. And we've been doing this for several years. And of late, I've been ending my vlogs with the standard peace prayer, although people can enter their prayer any way they wish. So this is what a sigil is, and how effective would it be to have something like this tattooed on you? Well, obviously it depends on what the sigil is and what you are using it for. Is it a sigil of a deity or spirit? Is it a sigil of an organization? Is it a sigil of an act of magic? Obviously each of these has its own considerations. But my first answer to this is that it could certainly be very effective. Now, is it advisable? That's an entirely different question. And the main thing that I would say is think about it long and hard before you have something like this tattooed upon yourself. There certainly are circumstances where having a tattoo of a particular sigil can be a good thing. And there are certainly circumstances where it might not be. And you who would bear the sigil on your body need to think about that in great detail. And in particular, do you want to interact with whatever this sigil represents for the entire rest of this incarnation and possibly carry it forward into other incarnations? That is, I think, the most important question. And it is certainly possible to have a tattoo either removed or tattooed over, but the likelihood of doing that is not necessarily always high. And I would just say think about it carefully. If it's an act of magic that the sigil represents, there are certainly certain acts of magic that you might want to carry forward indefinitely. For example, spells for prosperity. There are others that you might not want to carry forward. For example, anything which is temporary in character. If it's an organization that you belong to, obviously the question is, are you sure you're going to stay in that organization as long as you're going to have that tattoo? And if you feel that the answer to that is yes, or if you feel that even if you left the organization you would still like to have that symbol, well then by all means go ahead, but think about it before you do it. And in the case of a deity or a spirit, obviously it depends in part on what deity or spirit we're talking about. So there are many different things to think about, and there is not a one-size-fits-all answer as to whether it's advisable to do something like this. That's something that you really have to take on a case-by-case basis. Would it be effective? Well, I wouldn't be telling you to think about it if I didn't think it was effective. So yes, I think it could be, but I will say that the best way to do this if you're going to do it is that when you have that sigil tattooed, charge it in such a way that you have to open it to use it, and that you can close it when you don't want it. And I think that would be a good fail-safe. I don't know that you can do that with every sigil, but you certainly can do it with some, and I would recommend it. That way, when you want to work with that energy, you can open it, but when you don't want to work with it, you can close it. So those would be my thoughts. I hope you find them helpful, and until next time, may you blessed be. Please join me for our Correllian Peace Prayer. I pray for peace. I pray for love. I pray for stability. I pray for the nation where I live. I pray for the world.